Okay, so when I was little, I was born in England. I was born in Reading, Royal Berkshire Hospital. My parents lived in Chieveley after I was born, and when I was 7, we moved to Wales. Now we lived in so many houses. My dad was in the army, and I think after he left the army, he still kind of like insisted on moving everywhere. So we moved house to a place called Noddfa in Login. Now, this village was beautiful. It was Welsh for pollution, but Login was an incredibly stunning village. I was like the only child. Well, I wasn't. I think there was another 2 children in the village who I went to school with. But my house in Noddfa was the biggest house. It was 4 floors, 6 bedrooms, and it was the biggest house in the area. It was massive. And it used to be a pub. I loved it. My room was my room. I had the biggest room in the house because I was a spoilt child. I didn't have the best childhood, but when it came to being spoilt with material things, I tend to I was always given presents. I was always given stuff that I want on my Christmas list. As for those of you who read my autobiography, A Girl Wizard, I had a very disturbing childhood. Lots of violence, unfortunately. My mum was very loving, but she was also very poorly. And she couldn't protect us the way a mum would want to protect us. So I'm getting a bit tearful now. She's no longer with us, so my mum she wasn't well. She was always in and out of mental institutions, mental hospitals. But I didn't know that when I was little. I had no idea. My dad was very violent towards us, so whenever my mum wasn't around, my dad would be quite hard-hitting, and to be fair, a lot of children have gone through the same thing. He'd always take it out on us with the stuff that he did. The things that whenever something went wrong, we'd be the ones that were to blame, and we were the target. I think that's why this figure came to me when I was little. I didn't know that at the time. I was petrified. So anyway, we lived in a house that used to be an old pub, and it was massive. As I said, it was 4 floors, and it was huge. It started off when I was in primary. I'd see the end of like a black cape. Somebody would walk past because I'd play with the infants a lot because I never had any friends. In school, I was very bullied by a lot of people. I never had friends in school. I used to play on my own all the time. I was very much a loner, and I still am to this day. I have loads of friends, but I'm very isolated, and I am quite a loner, and I don't like people. I kind of keep people at a distance. It's quite bad, but I do. I played with the infants a lot because I love kids. I've always loved kids, and they always wanted to play with you, you know. I think that's why I like being Elsa as well. I played Elsa a few years ago, performing Elsa, and I loved it because I loved seeing the smile on kids' faces, and they were always so happy. I remember sitting in the kind of the infant section, and as I looked out the window, I could see like the end of a black cape. It was really weird. And I didn't really think much of it, but it was just kind of weird how it just kind of like just suddenly appeared. But it was like because they had massive windows, and so you had one window and then a thin kind of white window edge, and then the next window, and then you'd see the cape kind of going across like that, but then you would never see anything the other side of the window edge. It's really weird. And then I remember telling my mum about it because I could tell my mum anything, and she was normally really good, and she tried to be very open-minded, and I think that's what I loved about my mum. She was willing to listen and just kind of hear you out for whatever reason. Even before she died, she was exactly the same, even though she was really poorly lover. And as the time went on over the months and so on, I'd see like little snippets of black. And I can't tell you what it was, but it was just so weird how I would see the snippets of black. And then I remember, I think I was about 11, so it was about a year later, I was in my bedroom. I'd just done my ballet recital, and I passed, and I was so proud of myself, and my mum was so proud of me too. And we had black and white TVs back then. And for those of you who don't know what black and white TV, ask your parents. But I was given a black and white TV to have in my room, which for a child of my age was huge, you know, and we were quite poor, so that was like massive. And I remember sitting there, I had an old like brown school chair in my room, and I put the TV on it. And I remember sitting there on the floor, and it was one of the ones that you had to twiddle the dials to get the channels. And my brother was cross with me for some reason. I can't remember why. My brother's 5 years older than me, Lawrence. He's much older than me. And he was in the doorway of my bedroom. And I remember tuning and trying to tune my dials, and I couldn't find the channels, and I found it really odd. And he was kind of trying to get my attention, and I was trying to twiddle with the dials like this. And I remember looking up at him, and I just remember feeling white, as in ice cold white, because stood behind my brother was this completely black figure. It was completely black, and it was stood literally there behind my brother's shoulder. And I screamed so loudly. I don't remember my brother's reaction, but I remember seeing the hooded figure just kind of do this and walk away out of shot. And I was petrified. I was absolutely petrified. I had no idea what this figure was. I don't remember what happened after that, but afterwards, maybe a few months later, I remember my friend came over to stay the night, Rachel, and she was in my bedroom and I was in the bathroom, and I remember hearing her talking to somebody, and I was like, Eunice, that's really odd. So I came out of the bathroom, and Rachel just went, where have you been? Where have you just come from? And I said, I'm in the bathroom, which was next door to my room. I was in the bathroom, why? And she said, I literally just saw somebody walk past the doorway, a black figure walk past the doorway, and I thought it was you. And I said, no, that wasn't me. I think by that point, I started to realise that it possibly wasn't in my head, that it might have been me. Now, the house that we lived in, I will tell you more about it, but it actually was quite active with ghosts. It had quite a few restless spirits in there. It's an old pub. It was, and before that, it was actually built on top of a monastery back in the 16th century. So this house was incredibly old, and the foundations were incredibly old. So as you can imagine, there was a lot of like spirits and a lot of history about this place, and a lot of the people in it as well. It had a lot of history, and being an old pub, it probably absorbed a lot of energy as well. Now, Login in itself, if you ever figure out where it is in West Wales, if you get a chance to go, I highly recommend it, because it is a really beautiful place. With waterfalls and valleys and forestry, and the forestry goes on forever. It's beautiful. I remember my friend Grace coming over for the day. Now, she only lived a couple of miles up the road, and she came over to play for a little while. And this house, obviously, because it was an old pub, had an old cellar. We went down the cellar, and we heard the door slam behind us, and there was, as far as we know, there was no one else in the house. Now, I don't remember this happening because I've blocked quite a lot out, but Grace will tell you to this day that word for word, that is exactly what happened, and we still don't know what the hell happened. The door slammed and there was no draft at all, and we couldn't get back out. I remember seeing this hooded figure quite a few times, but then the house, as I said, was really, really strange. I remember being in my cabin bed, because I had one of those really tall cabin beds, you know, with like all the cupboards and everything underneath. And I had my friend in the bed next to me, and my friend Nicola, she was at the end of the bed. Now, I think she's still on Twitter, so if she sees this story, I really wanted to contact me whether she remembers this or not. But I remember, again, the figure, the all in black figure, not as vividly as with my brother, but I remember seeing this figure at the end of my bed, and it was just stood there. And obviously I completely screamed. I couldn't cope with it. I completely screamed. It was scaring me. It was coming up to me really close, and there was no reason for it. I don't understand why it was doing it. There were lots of things in that house. We used to have 13 cats. Of all the things, 13 cats, but we loved cats. They weren't kind of like, interbreeding or anything like that. They were neutered, but we loved having cats. And I remember things like my cat would be asleep upstairs in my room, And we had a really long floor-to-ceiling mirror in the hallway where I would do my hair and everything in the morning before going to school. And I remember seeing my cat coming down the stairs. And I was like, oh, babe, hello, darling. And there was no cat. She was still asleep upstairs in my room. I remember my brother and his girlfriend being out in the garden and looking. I was washing the dishes, looking up to see them talking, because where they were sat, they were right in front of the kitchen window. And I remember doing this and seeing them get up. Claire, his girlfriend, walked first, and then my brother Lawrence walked down with her. Now, it's literally only a few steps and you come through the back door. I'm literally like this. I see them walking down, and then I put my head down and I'm doing this, washing the dishes, and they don't come through the door. And I look up, and they literally, an exact replica, an exact image of what I have just seen happens again, and they come down the stairs. Very strange things. Time shifted there as well. And also I remember my sister and my mum going down what we call the railway track. There was an old railway track which stretched quite far across all the villages. It wasn't a railway track anymore, it was actually just a path now. But they'd walk down there quite often. And my mum remembers talking to my sister and seeing my sister behind my sister, the exact doppelganger of my sister. And it was just it really freaked them out. So much happened in that house. I remember laying down when I was very little in my bed. I had to have my door open because the house scared me to death. I had to have my door open. And I remember laying there and hearing something in my room. And I had my duvet up over my head, which I was very claustrophobic anyway. I didn't like doing, but I did it because I didn't want to see what was out in my room. And I remember feeling the end of my duvet by my feet going up like this, to the point where my feet got really cold. And it stayed there for a few minutes, and then it slowly went back down again onto my bed. We actually had people staying in the house later on after I moved, because my parents owned that house for quite a few years after I moved out. And a gentleman was actually staying in my room, and the same thing happened to him. The duvet went up and it went back down again. I remember being in the spare room when my parents were away, and I was with my husband, ex-husband, and we were laying there in bed in my old room, and we heard in the attic, and then we'd hear someone going. But it was walking around in circles. They were just pacing, walking around in circles. So it sounded like a child running. And then you had somebody with quite heavy footsteps walking around in a circle upstairs in the attic. But you heard him. He started to talk to himself, this gentleman started to talk, and you couldn't understand what he was saying, but it was a man, and he was talking, and he was in the attic. Bearing in mind, we are the only two people, and the house next door, this is our attic, and that is their attic. Ours was raised compared to theirs, so it wasn't their house. And this went on for about 45 minutes. It was proper freaky, but at the end of it, we actually relaxed because we could hear it for so long. We actually felt quite calm about it. Now, my parents separated, they ended up getting divorced, and I decided as I got older, I think I was 23, enough was enough. This house had scared me for years. I wanted to know what was going on, because later on, after we had moved, I bumped into somebody in a nearby village who asked me where I lived before. And I said to them, oh, I lived in the big house, Nodfer, known as Springfield. They changed the name. And he went, oh, he said, did you ever see the black figure in that house? Because the lady who lived before you apparently haunted her boys all the time. And I was like, no, I never saw it in my life. I was completely freaked out by that point, because I just kind of realised it wasn't just me. I wasn't going mad, that this story was actually well known in the area, but nobody had spoken about it before. It was so weird. So in the end, I managed to get a really good friend of mine, Robert Amore, and a gentleman I used to know, Simon Kerwood, come in to my house and do an investigation. Now, Robert Amore is actually a very well-respected spiritualist, so I trust him 100%. Simon, I didn't know him very well at all. They came into my house not knowing anything. I'd never met Rob before. This was the first time we'd been introduced. I hadn't told them about my house. In fact, when they turned up, they thought they were investigating the current house I was living in Whitland, which I wasn't. Obviously, we were going to drive them to my parents' house. They came in the house and they were really shocked with what they found. The house was actually haunted by 9 individual spirits, which was shocking. Now, when Simon Kerwood and Robert Amore went up to my bedroom, well, what used to be my old bedroom, the first thing Simon did was kneel down beside my bed and say he felt like he needed to pray. Well, that was it. I was out of there like that. I was completely and utterly gone. I was screaming. I was out that room and ran down the stairs. And bless Rob, he came down and he got me. We eventually went back upstairs. I've got this all on video, but I don't know where the video is. It's disappeared. It's probably in the attic somewhere, but I have it all recorded because we filmed the entire thing. We went back upstairs and it turned out that this ghost was called Father Francis. He was protecting children from harm. There was a gentleman that used to be there that we called the Fat Man. He stank. You could smell his aura. He was horrible. And he actually killed a young 8-year-old girl just up the road from this house. And the Fat Man haunted this house. Not only was this Father Francis trying to protect me from the Fat Man, but he was also trying to protect me from my father. Unfortunately, the only thing that protected me from my dad was fighting back one day when I was 15. Anyway, Father Francis was so sorry that he had scared me all those years. And when I screamed, for example, and when he left, it was because he didn't want to upset me. As a really young girl, I didn't know that. Obviously, you don't know that. And all he kept saying was, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, over and over and over again through Simon Kerwood. Again, bearing in mind, they had no idea about any of this because I didn't like telling people. I tell people now because it helps me to kind of come to terms with it all, especially about my father. He was no longer in my life, by the way. It has been cut out for a long time. But ghosts seem to follow us completely, except this house. This house has been completely clean the entire time we've lived here. I think it's because we're happy, we're done, we're content, we're happy, we're settled. But for example now, when I was little, when I was 3 years old, my grandmother passed away, sadly. I don't remember much about her. My mum and my dad, my brother, my sister, all went to my granddad's, obviously, the funeral, to say goodbye to my mum's mum. And when we came back, we were only gone for about 4 days. And when we came back, my mum bumped into my dad's cousin. And she said, "Oh, hi Sue, where are you living now? I called into your house and an old lady answered." Sorry? Excuse me, what was that? My dad's cousin had called to my mum and dad's house in Cheveley, South England, and an old lady or an old man had answered the door and they had no idea who Sue and Pete Whiting were. So my mum doing a bit of investigating, we're talking to other villagers because they were very close to everybody back then. My neighbours, Kath and Eddie, were looking after the house and they remember seeing milk bottles outside the house, the door, and the door left wide open one day. Now, Kath remembers vividly that she actually locked it and yet the next morning the door was wide open. Now, it turned out that half the people in the village actually saw a caravan in the driveway and half the villagers didn't. They even had a police investigation. which was really strange because there was no evidence of people living in the house other than the door being wide open and milk bottles being left outside. Now, a couple of weeks after the investigation had been concluded and they couldn't find anything wrong with the property, I remember sitting, it was during every Sunday we'd have like sandwiches and cakes and things laid out on the coffee table and we'd sit round and watch TV. And I remember sitting in between my dad and my mum on the sofa. Again, I'm only 3 years old, but I remember this like it was yesterday. And I remember my mum saying to my dad, "Can you smell bleach?" And apparently there was such a strong smell of bleach that it hurt my mum's nose. Nobody else could smell it except my mum. And I remember we had a cockatoo, a bird. My mum always had cockatoos, and it was hung up in a cage, not actually hung up in a cage on the ceiling just by the kitchen door. And there was a coat hanger, because Mum used to iron there and hang things on the coat hanger. And there was a coat hanger hanging on the cage. And I remember literally to this day seeing that coat hanger swing like that and get faster and faster, and then everything goes blank. I don't remember a thing after that. But apparently it was very poltergeist activity. It just suddenly started. Really, really odd. It was in the paper for ages, and every now and again, every couple of years, they bring this story back into the newspaper because Auntie Carol and Uncle Eddie always send us the clipping that they find in the paper, thinking, oh my God, is that again? But we've always been followed by spirits, always. It's really strange. But I think it does help that I am a paranormal investigator, or was a paranormal investigator years ago. And I have actually seen more ghosts than most people. Because I've seen, obviously, the Father Francis, the black figure. I've seen a gentleman at a bar stood there like he was a normal person, and it turned out he wasn't. I've seen, I think, a lady in white. I have seen so many things to the point where it's actually quite scary how open everything is with me, with ghosts and spirits. I remember hearing a story though, which I would love to know more about. My brother-in-law and my sister and I lived in 2 houses next to each other. She hadn't long had her little boy, and I hadn't long had Monica, because we had them close together. 6 weeks and 6 days to be exact. But we lived next door to each other. And I wasn't there at the time. I think I was away staying with my parents. And my brother-in-law could hear scratching at the window. Very odd, I know. To the point where it actually woke him up. Now, this legend is actually a legend down southwest Wales. I have heard that there are more people that have seen this thing. Now, my brother-in-law woke up, went to the window, bearing in mind it's 2 stories up, there is nothing underneath. And when he opened the curtains, this creature, hairy creature with yellow eyes or green eyes, lunged at him through the glass. Apparently very long yellow claws, really hairy like this, and filled the entire window, and it lunged at him through the glass. He falls back over the bed. I don't know what happens there afterwards. Now he is a biker. My brother-in-law is a biker. Stuff like this really kind of creeps him out. He doesn't like talking about it. But the more I investigated, the more I had actually heard about this story of this demon, this thing coming at you, but they scare children. The only thing I can conclude is that this thing tried my nephew's window, which was next door to my sister and her boyfriend. Jake, only being little, couldn't get out of his cot. He's probably fast asleep. He's only about a year old. And this thing then tried the next window, because obviously I wasn't even home, so nothing would have happened with me. And then he tried the next window, and obviously Jarv was the one that came to the window. Now, my sister's friend, her little boy has seen this thing in a big French door window, and she didn't know about it. He was only about 4 or 5. She didn't know about it until much, much later, when he finally told her. I remember being in college with a lady, and she said that her brother, it's mostly boys that it affects apparently, that her brother also saw this thing in its bedroom window late at night. And I also read a couple of years ago online, there's an actor in America, I don't know who he is, I can't remember, who used to live in Wales. And he remembers, he lived on a farm, and he remembers seeing this thing, big thing, filled the window, yellow or green eyes with big yellow claws lunging at him through the glass. And he remembers that happening to him. So it's kind of a legend in Wales that's been happening here. I'd love to know more about it, but I can't find enough on the internet about it, and it's driving me mad. But it seems to only affect boys. It seems to only come after boys, the male side of the family. So it's really, really, really odd how that happens. It's almost like a supernatural TV series thing with the yellow-eyed demon, because every time we talk about the yellow-eyed demon as supernatural, I think of that exact thing. It's just so true. It's just so brilliant. I love that show. That's so good. So yeah. Happy Halloween! You filthy half-blood! Thank you so much for watching. Please make sure that you subscribe to my channel, invite your friends, and also like this video and let me know down below in the comment section, what did you think of this video? What would you like me to cover? Until then, thank you so much. Take care. I love you all, and I'll speak to you very soon.